Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Jude Morrow, and he's here to share with us his new book, Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad? Now, Jude was born in Northern Ireland, and he currently works as a social worker and a specialist in the care of older people and dementia care. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at 11 and lived many years in denial of his diagnosis. Jude is now an advocate for those living with autism spectrum disorders. He has one son, Ethan, who was born in 2013, and we're going to be sharing his debut book today, Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad? So let's welcome to the show, Jude Morrow.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, Jude, it's such an honor to have you here. Once I picked up your book, I could not put it down. You've done a fabulous job writing this.
Oh, thanks very much. I've always loved reading and writing. Whenever I was younger, I couldn't communicate very well verbally, and I suppose I was able to read and write much, much quicker than I was able to speak and communicate with my peers and even family. So I think this is a craft that has been in the making for the last 29 years and 9 months.
Well, you have such an inspiring style of writing. I have to ask you, because you really poured your heart into this, why did you decide now is the time to write this book?
Well, I have always known that I have been different. I'm not like most others. I'm autistic, and I always have been from the moment I was born and will be until the day and hour I die. One evening I was at home, and this was last winter, and I knew that Ethan was picking up my son, who's now 6, is picking up that I'm maybe not quite like him. And he asks questions and, Daddy, why do you do this? Daddy, why do you like things in a certain order? Why do you like things to happen at certain times of the day? And I knew that Ethan would eventually ask more about that. So I thought that I would write something that would be easier to understand with open-ended kind of questions and with very kind of vague questioning. I seem to struggle. So what I wanted to do is I feel that I can communicate much more effectively in the written word in a lot of difficult situations. So what I decided to do was chronicle my story from my earliest years right up until he was perhaps 3 or 4, and the journey that I went on, because he's at school now. He's at a mainstream school. I was at a mainstream school, but I had a lot of support from classroom assistants and teachers, and I just wanted to do my story justice and for Ethan to have, for him to read about his father, who I am and where I came from.
What an inspiring legacy to leave your son. So who else do you feel this book is for? Who else would benefit from reading this book?
Well, whenever I was young, being autistic wasn't talked about very often. It's very mainstream now. It's in the public eye. It's in the public domain, much more than it's ever has been. And I think it's a testament that autistic people like me can grow to live happy and successful lives. My parents asked a lot of questions whenever I was young. How would Jude manage whenever he's at secondary school? Would Jude ever go to university? Would Jude be okay as an adult? Because even up until I was 13 or 14, Marianne, my parents weren't entirely confident that I would ever be capable of independent living. That's where I came from. And I suppose this book for autistic people, maybe in their teens, early teens, I wish there was something like this whenever I was a teenager, for a success story for someone who grew up, beat the odds, beat the poor misconceptions and mass misinformation that's out there, and came out happy on the other side. So I hope autistic teenagers or even young adults can read the book and think, well, if Jude Morrow grew to be okay, because I don't think anybody in the history of autism ever hated being autistic as much as I did as a teenager, knowing that I was different, being the eternal onlooker, unable to fit in with my peers. And I know a lot of people can resonate with that, and hopefully give them, their parents, families, caregivers, whoever it may be, teachers even, some hope for the future.
Do you feel that your work will inspire other people with autism to start their journaling process and writing process as well?
Absolutely. I think now there's a need for autistic voices more than ever. I think it's becoming awareness and acceptance are much more prevalent in today's world, although I will admit there is a long way to go. But on the good side is that there's a lot of autistic teenagers, especially that I meet and have met throughout my speaking tours and so on, that are so comfortable and confident at the fact that they're autistic. They see being autistic as a gift as opposed to a burden to be pitied, which is a message that I love to spread. On the other side of that, though, I don't harbour a lot of naivety. I know that a lot of autistic people will have varying levels of need, will have different life circumstances, and I suppose I can say from my own personal story that I'm reasonably lucky. But the theme does still stay the same, and that I hope it can inspire as many autistic people and their families as it can.
Well, that's so beautiful. I mean, my goodness, there's so many voices that we need to include in the conversation, and having autistic writers join in is a very important piece.
Absolutely. It goes to show that so many autistic people have lived throughout the ages, whether they've been confirmed to be or almost certainly were. But Einstein, even modern Hollywood figures like Tim Burton and Dan Aykroyd are becoming more open about being autistic and about how their autism has shaped their craft, whether it be for Dan Aykroyd, whether it's writing music, or Tim Burton and making his Oscar-winning films. It's that attention to detail, that being able to channel your passions and positive energy and do something that you truly love and can change the world with it. And I think more people who are in the mainstream media coming out about being autistic is serving not only to help autistic people come to terms with being autistic themselves, but that being autistic is absolutely fine.
I think it also gives teachers, parents, and loved ones a reference point for what is possible, because for so long, I think there's been this erroneous view.
Absolutely. My story is, in terms of being an autistic child, it's totally unremarkable. I have gone through many of the same things that many autistic children all over the world go through, wondering why I have had a classroom assistant sit beside me all the time in school, not having many friends, having teachers rolling their eyes at me anytime I ask them a question, not being invited to birthday parties. I mean, these are issues and events and that happened to me while I was growing up that I think a lot of people will relate to. And I think the reason why whenever I self-published the book initially, before it was taken on by Beyond Words, why it spread and became so positive so quickly, it was the fact that it was so similar to the story that the reader was going through as well.
Without a doubt, then people can really relate to what you're going through. Perhaps they don't get invited to parties, or maybe they're really having a tough time. I think it's something that everyone can really connect with.
Yeah, of course it is. And at the time, I was so keen on fitting in. I just wanted to be like everybody else. And I knew that I just wasn't. And that was my perspective then at the time. But it's funny that now as an adult, I get a lot more invites to parties and I simply choose not to go. As people would say, that's somewhat contradictory. Whenever you were a child, you longed to mix and go to children's parties. But that wasn't really the issue. I didn't long to go to children's parties. I longed to be like everybody else. And now that I'm open and proud at the fact that I'm not like everybody else, I embrace that. And other people can too.
Well, you mentioned this before. You talked about autism as a gift. Why don't you share your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I know that a lot of people would disagree with that sentiment, and I'll give you the reason why. I would be someone who would be labelled as Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism, as it was known then. Now it's all under the one spectrum of autism. I believe that being autistic is a gift because I can use my positive energy and passions and turn it into something that a lot of people can relate to, like my book. And a lot of people in history have been shown to be the same as well, kind of alluding to my earlier point, that some of the world's leading people in their respective fields have been either confirmed to be or almost certainly autistic. One misconception that I want to break down is that whilst I was labeled as high functioning autism. Whenever Ethan was coming along, before Ethan was born, I spent pretty much 7 months holed up in a room, Marianne. I wasn't functioning very highly at all. I didn't go out of the house very often. I didn't really talk to anybody. I only got up, went to work, and went home. I needed a lot of support and guidance from my family, who I was living with at the time. As far as me being autistic, I would describe myself as being autistic in the absence of a learning disability. And one misconception that I want to break down, and I have found it a bit more prevalent, especially in North America, is that a lot of people would use the term autism to describe a intellectual disability, whereas I am autistic with the absence of an intellectual disability. And that's not to say that those with intellectual disabilities don't have gifts either. We all have our own gifts. Us as mankind all have our own special gifts and talents. But whenever it comes to autism, one of the symptoms, in inverted commas, as people would say, is obsessional behaviors. And with that, my obsession for writing, because it's not allowed to be called a passion, Marianne, if you're autistic, it has to be called an obsession. I used that passion to write my book. Mozart used his passion to write music. Michelangelo used his passion to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Whereas in their time, they were called by their peers obsessive. That's where I wanted to add that having this focus on a particular topic that you love is the gift, and your gift, when shared, can change the world forever.
You know, that's such an important piece. I mean, how boring would it be if we were all the same? And it's having that diversity, having those differences. You know, when we come together, we come up with some pretty amazing things.
Absolutely. And I just want people to know, more importantly, that it's perfectly okay to be different. I didn't like being different. I knew I was different and did not like it. And I reflect on my childhood, teenage years, and even up to my early 20s, and think if I had have accepted and loved the fact that I was different then, maybe what would my life be like now? But for me, it was better late than never. I accept it now. I love it now, and other people can as well.
How important is that? You know, I have to ask you, how would you like to see society change their views?
I would like society to recognize that being autistic is a different neurotype. I think there's a lot of medical language used when the autism discussion is opened. For me, and even on my medical records, it says autistic spectrum disorder. Now, I don't view what I have as a disorder, so to speak. I think that being autistic is a different neurotype that doesn't necessarily affect intellect so much, although I do understand, as I cannot say enough, that there are many people who are also autistic but also have intellectual disabilities tied into it. I just want wider society to view autism as a gift like I do. I think it certainly is a gift, and without autistic people, the world certainly wouldn't be where it's at today. And that's what I want people to recognize. I think a lot of people see, whenever I actually ask people, if I'm doing training workshops with teachers or I visit autistic support groups and I ask parents, professionals, whoever it may be, about what autism is, a lot of the answers I get back are extremely negative. For example, it's for those who can't make eye contact, whereas I can make eye contact very well. Does that mean I'm not autistic? So there's a lot of misconceptions like that, and there's a lot of overly negative connotations attached, and that autistic people are antisocial. I think that's another misconception that people use, even though I have a select group of friends and a girlfriend and a son. I think that's another thing, and there's many autistic people out there who are in the same position as me. And I think that being autistic certainly is a different neurotype, the same way there's so many different neurotypes in the world. And that's what way ultimately I want autism to be viewed. Without autistic people, I don't believe mankind can be where it's at. Einstein, his passion was unlocking the codes and secrets of the universe, and with his obsession, as non-autistic people would put it, but whereas I would see that as his passion, it defines time, space, and the nature of reality. I mean, without these passions and drive, the human race simply wouldn't be where it's at. And I've said very, very frequently that I think it was probably the autistic Neanderthal that sat for hours and hours trying to find the first spark that created fire and create the wheel and so on.
You know, Jude, there are so many things I learned from your book, and I so appreciate you writing this. I really appreciate the fact that you bring to the forefront the passion that autistic people bring to the table and how that's a burning desire.
It is, and I would see myself as a very passionate and driven person. If I visualize something, I go for it. And that has had both positive and negative connotations. I wanted to have a book for my son, which I got, and I think sending out the autistic message is something that really has resonated, and I've sort of developed a new passion that has come out of the book, writing the book itself, is spreading the message, is being in front of as many people as I can to say that being autistic is okay, because I am autistic. I have been there. Whenever I meet children, teenagers, young people, their families, they get me because I've been there. And I get them because I once was them. So it really, there's a big and deep understanding there between me and other autistic people. And even whenever parents even ask me for advice, I can say I know what that feels like because I can still remember it.
Well, I'm so glad that you're here to share this conversation with us. There are so many people that, before autism became this widely known diagnosis, there are so many people I grew up with that probably were autistic, and they didn't fall anywhere. You have people with such great passions for certain things, and it's good that there's room at the table for everyone, and we need these varying points of view to elevate the discussion just in general.
Of course there is. I mean, my door is open for every single autistic person in the whole entire world. And my book is for every single autistic person on the whole entire world. It's funny that whenever a lot of people do think of autism, they do think of small children. And I was once one of those small children. Now I'm 6'4" and I have a very well-groomed beard. So I have grown up. I have been there. I've been through the school system. And when it comes to a stage when I'm in my 70s or 80s, should I be spared, I will still be autistic then. There have been many, many people I've met who have been diagnosed in adulthood, even up as far as nearly 90 years of age, that people have been diagnosed so late in life. And it just goes to show that autism isn't an affliction simply for children or a poor burden that children need to or should grow out of. I mean, we are autistic for our entire lives, and people can previously have been autistic the same way, like nobody can shake themselves of it. And even if I was offered a cure for being autistic, I almost certainly wouldn't take it, because I think with me as an autistic person, I wouldn't have got as far as I've gotten. I wouldn't have got the drive and ambition and passion that I have in my life without it. And I can't imagine my brain not being the way it is. I suppose channeling the autistic passion and energy is a bit like Spider-Man learning to spin webs. Whenever I say to small children that being autistic is a gift and they don't understand that, I explain it in terms of Spider-Man trying to spin webs, or Superman learning to fly. Don't know if Batman really applies, but the sentiment's there.
I believe there'd be an argument about including Batman in that category.
Yeah, for all the Batman lovers out there, because somebody actually did ask me at a live show, said, what about Batman? I think I snapped a little bit, and I said, well, Bruce Wayne had loads of money, so it's okay. He can learn to do anything incredibly quickly. We're not all as blessed as Batman, I'm sorry. But I think that's a good way to explain it to children. Like, being autistic, it's like a superpower that can only be channeled with the right acceptance, love, and maturity, of which I certainly didn't have until I was about 25, and I'm 29 now. So my newfound love for being autistic hasn't been a lifelong thing.
Well, I would say your superpower is being autistic. I mean, how beautiful is that? And I have to ask you, when was the first time you realized that you were different than other kids?
Well, whenever I was young, I always knew that I was different. There was no real autistic conversation back then. It became apparent to my parents whenever I was two, three, and four. I went to a couple of play groups that didn't meet my needs, and then I eventually was at a group for children with mixed abilities. If I had been born perhaps 10 years prior in 1980 instead of 1990 when I actually was born, the chances are I would have went to a special needs school despite having the IQ to go to a mainstream school. So I did go to a mainstream school and I had classroom assistants right the way up through school. At one stage, my classroom assistant and older sister in school were my only friends. I just couldn't really mix very well. I had a couple of people I would say I was acquainted with, but or that tolerated me, so to speak. And I always had that bitterness that I wasn't really like everybody, and that continued right the way through school. And I joined a youth group whenever I was 14. It wasn't an autistic specific youth group. It was a youth group that recognized that perhaps I wasn't like the other group members, and I was able to channel my passion and love for the group to achieve good outcomes like charitable funding and so on. And I became reasonably good at it, and I was really happy there. And because I mentioned all my social difficulties and so on, I did get better, and then I went to university, qualified as a social worker, and then whenever I was maybe in my early 20s, and bearing in mind, being autistic was not something that entered my mind. My parents didn't want to have a label assigned to me or anything, and didn't tell me. Whether rightly or wrongly, I know many people have different views on that, but I was told in my maybe late teens, early 20s. And whenever I was a qualified social worker with my own car, my own house, I thought, well, being autistic, something I left behind. Whew, remember that phase? I was autistic. Ha! And then whenever I found out I was going to be a dad, and Ethan was coming along, a lot of the maybe traits and behaviors that I thought that I'd left behind in my childhood all of a sudden resurfaced. And in order to form a positive and happy relationship with my son, Ethan, who is not autistic, I had to go on a journey of self-acceptance to find happiness, and that's where I've been. And at the end of that journey, I had kept notepads and diaries throughout, and it was chronologized to the point where I had "Why does Daddy always look so sad?" and what the format that we have now.
You know, Jude, your book was such a great and easy read, and it did a lot of educating. A lot of people feel that a common trait of autism is having these repetitive interests. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that's all about?
Yes, it does, because narrow-minded and repetitive interests. I mean, I admit I have them. One of which is for cars. I am a big car fan, and another thing I love, which seems to be a common thing in the autistic community, and I can't work out why, is the Titanic. I absolutely love it. It was built 70 miles from my house. I love every part of it. I knew where everything was in the ship, and so on. But with me, I'm obsessed with the Titanic. If I wasn't autistic, I would be a Titanic expert. Do you see what I mean?
Oh my goodness, I could so easily see you as a Titanic researcher. They're really getting into that right now, and I can totally see you doing that.
Yeah, so that's something that does get to me. Like I wouldn't view myself as a narrow-minded or I have narrow interests. But for those particular things, whenever I take an interest in something or someone, I have to know absolutely everything about it or them. It's like an addiction. It's like an addiction for knowledge. It's I like with especially with the Titanic. And funny, at a live show, somebody actually tried to be clever and asked me, "Oh, where was the barber shop on the Titanic?" And I said, "Haha, C deck beside the purser's office." So they were quite amazed that 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 I knew that, but I knew that because I was obsessed. I didn't know that because I was passionate or interested or maybe an expert. I mean, I don't know. But that's, I mean, at what point does a passion or a hobby become an obsessive interest? I mean, but where really is the line? To me, it seems to be a bit blurred, but it seems to be a more societal thing that people think autistic people are obsessed with things as opposed to being experts in their fields that they're passionate about.
Well, couldn't we use more people who are passionate about something? It seems like a lot of people have kind of lost that a little bit. So why don't you share with us your thoughts around humor and autistic people?
See, another misconception, autistic people can have a sense of humor. See, because, I mean, I'm a hoot now and again. I'm quite eccentric. I'm quite outgoing. I'm quite wacky, and I'm happy with it. I suppressed it for so long, and although sometimes I don't get jokes and I don't get social cues because with my beautiful and understanding girlfriend Penny, if I say to her, "Penny, are you okay?" and she says, "Yes, Jude, I'm fine," I think, "Phew, Penny's fine. Thank."
Oh my gosh, and you're in so much trouble when that happens.
Yeah, but some things still pass me by. I admit that, but sometimes people have to spell things out for me. It's the same with Ethan as well. Sometimes, where in times gone by, he would have said things like, "Daddy, I'm thirsty," or "Daddy, the park. Wonder what's going on in the park," instead of saying, "Daddy, can we go to the park, please?" He knows he has to communicate with me very differently. He has to be very direct with me to make sure that I get what he wants. And we laugh about it now and then. Sometimes it can sound very sharp. And I'm thinking, oh dear, I'm sorry.
Oh my goodness. It sounds like Ethan really understands that there's a difference in the way that he communicates with you than anybody else.
Yeah, he does. He knows that he needs to be very direct with me. He knows that I like a certain type of order. He knows I like the expected. And yeah, he knows what way to wind me up to because at the front door there's Daddy's work shoes, Daddy's running shoes, Ethan's football boots, Ethan, or cleats as they're known in the States, and he'll move one or two of them now and again and wait for my reaction. So he does know that I'm different to him, but he's a very empathetic and understanding boy too. He's full of love and happiness because I would struggle sometimes with crowded and unpredictable situations. Like children's play areas, I can struggle with. It's just a big sensory overload of the food, the smells of food, the sound of shoes squeaking off a lacquered floor, and children screaming and crying and so on. And sometimes if I'm struggling, Ethan will come up to me and ask me, "Oh, do you want to go home now?" So he knows when I'm not too pleased in a situation and will try and steer me away from it, even though he's only 6.
You know, what a beautiful insight and education Ethan is getting. Not everyone communicates the same way, and he's going to be an expert at this when he gets older.
He will be an expert, and although why will he not be obsessed with it? Because he's not autistic. He'll not be obsessed with communicating with people differently. He will be an expert in it. Whereas with me, I did have to obsess a bit to learn to communicate more effectively with different people. I had to learn to adapt my communication style, and it's hard. It's not easy. Sometimes I can have issues with knowing my audience. So, and I think it's easier to express myself in the written word. And I don't think there's a lot that's open to misinterpretation in the book itself.
Well, you shared with us earlier that you're a social worker. Why did you decide to go in that field?
Because I enjoyed being at a youth group. I'd finally found something productive that I was good at. Whenever I was at school, I didn't like making things with my hands. I wasn't. I wasn't the most academic person that's ever lived. But whenever I applied myself and I found myself having a mutual goal with other people, I flourished. And even whenever people had problems or issues and People would come to me because of the logical way that my mind is. I can step back from the situation, assess it logically, and think, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I thought, okay, maybe I can do that as my career, and that's where being a social worker came from. And that's the methodology that I've used since I qualified back in 2012, is the gift of being able to step back from a situation, assess it logically, and come up with positive outcomes for vulnerable people.
Oh my gosh, we need more people in the world like that, having that kind of passion.
We do.
So Jude, when we look at your life as an adult, what were some of the strongest support outlets that you've had?
Well, whenever I was growing up, there wasn't many autistic-specific support and guidance out there because it wasn't as mainstream and widely known as it is now. So I just had the patience and love and kindness of my family and friends that were able to understand that I was different without necessarily knowing exactly what label or diagnosis that I actually had. But what I would encourage people to do is to look at neurodiversity-friendly websites to understand that what they have is not a disease, it's not a disorder, it's just a different neurotype to everyone else. And there's so many different organizations out there that do promote neurodiversity, and I don't believe that a lot of websites and supports out there that would see autism in a more pathological way is in any way helpful, because whenever I read them, I take things very literally, whether that's someone speaking to me verbally or things that I read. Whilst I understand that a lot of websites and so on are very, very well intentioned, it can cause some hurt and discomfort to autistic people. God, do I have a disease? Do I have a severe disorder? It's not that. Whilst in medical textbooks and this wider societal knowledge, probably yes, but ultimately it's just a different neurotype to everyone else. The same way people have different variants of eyesight or hearing or height or weight or anything else. It's simply a different brain processing method, the autistic way, as opposed to any other.
So how can someone build their own support group if they're autistic?
Well, there are a lot of autistic groups, charitable groups in every area. One question, that's a question that I'm very, very commonly asked at any live shows that I do, is, where can I get support? I would always encourage people to seek out the voluntary and charitable groups that do two things. One, it gives the autistic children a chance to meet other autistic children like them, just to feel that they're not alone in the world. And then for parents to meet with other parents so they don't feel as alone in the world as well. Because I know my own mother, my love of my life and soulmate, found times quite lonely with me when I was growing up because they just weren't as common. And as I grew up and became older, and she finds that she can relate to a lot of people and can relate to a lot of people's experiences, and a lot of people could have related to her experiences as well. So that's the first thing I would do. If people are concerned or believe that their child may be autistic, I can't say this enough. A diagnosis only seeks to confirm what a parent already knows, because I have never met anyone who has believed their child to be autistic and been completely wrong. And I have never encountered a voluntary or charitable group that has refused assistance, advice, care, and support because of a lack of a diagnosis. I have never encountered that, because a lot of people who are in those groups now were in the same position at one stage. I'm waiting on a diagnosis. What do I do? So it just goes to show that there's so many people out there in the same position, whether it's on social media or on the internet. Look up local groups applicable to you where children can meet children like them and parents can meet parents going through the same things in life.
Well, your book, Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad, I thought was a great starting point for a lot of people. It gives them some really good resources in regards to how we view autism and how that conversation needs to change.
Yeah, it does. And I think ultimately there's going to be a lot of people, and yeah, I have had this, that people, whenever they've read my book, they've thought perhaps they could be autistic themselves. And I'd said, okay, and I mean, and that's fine. And then, and months later, I was only too happy to welcome them to the club. So it may give some comfort. There may be people out there that maybe never had the label, as we discussed earlier, but know inside themselves that they feel different. And I hope that my book can help people to understand if they do feel different, and that it is completely okay, and the right people in your life will love and support you even if you are different.
Now, isn't that the truth? My goodness, I am so glad that you got to share your book with us. Jude, where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about your book, and be part of your community?
Absolutely. My social medias are, I have my Jude Morrow author page. It's just Jude Morrow author on Facebook. Feel free to message. I love talking to people. I love having conversations with people, and I would say that I am a proud black belt owner of responding to people. I love responding. I always do. My Instagram is at Jude Morrow, and my Twitter is at Jude Morrow 10. That's my Twitter. And by all means, email me as well. The email responses may be a little bit slower at judemorrowbooks@gmail.com. And my website is www.judemorrow.com, and that has all the newest information regarding the book release, which is in North America, 7th of April. It has all the pre-order information and even a contact sheet if anyone would like me to come and speak to their group or to their school conference event or whatever it may be. So I want to leave myself as available as I possibly can. And I love having the autistic conversation with people now because I spent so long not wanting to have it. So I suppose I'm making up for lost time.
Well, I'm so glad we had this conversation, Jude, and please make up for lost time. This has been such a great discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
And thank you for having me, Marianne. Really, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jude. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course, to talk about your new book, Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad? Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and select indie retailers. Again, if you'd like to connect with Jude, you can at judemorrow.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just what moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Friday and Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.